The 1960s, a decade of change, liberation, and vibrant cultural shifts, is often looked back upon with a mix of nostalgia and amazement. As we rummage through the treasure chest of the past, it's intriguing to find that several norms and practices, once ubiquitous in the 60s, have since been consigned to the pages of history, not just because of changing times, but because they're now actually banned. Let's take a walk down memory lane and explore 8 iconic things that everyone did in the 60s but are now banned. Remember the days when the air in restaurants, offices, and even airplanes was often thick with smoke? Smoking was not just a habit, it was a symbol of sophistication and glamour. Television shows and movies from the era portrayed characters nonchalantly lighting up cigarettes in every conceivable setting, encapsulating the spirit of the times. Ashtrays were as common as coffee cups in meeting rooms, and it wasn't unusual to see doctors in ads endorsing specific cigarette brands. But then came the health revelations. The turning point was the Surgeon General's report in 1964, which linked smoking to lung cancer and other severe health issues. This marked the beginning of a gradual shift in public perception and policy. Fast forward to today, and smoking in public places is largely banned across the globe. These regulations aim to protect non-smokers from secondhand smoke and discourage smoking as a whole. The smoky haze in public spaces is now a thing of the past, replaced by clearer, cleaner air. Seatbelts in the 1960s? More of an optional accessory than a safety requirement. Cars were often equipped with seatbelts, but using them was largely a matter of personal preference. The nonchalant attitude towards seatbelt usage mirrored the era's laid-back approach to life. However, this casualness had a dark side, a higher rate of fatalities and injuries in road accidents. The game-changer came with mounting evidence of seatbelts significantly reducing the risk of death and serious injury in accidents. This led to the gradual implementation of seatbelt laws. Starting in the 1980s, wearing seatbelts became mandatory in many parts of the world. Today, buckling up is second nature for most of us. However, it's still fun to think back to the days when buckling up was merely an option. In the 1960s, bicycles were as much a symbol of freedom and leisure as they were a mode of transportation. Images of people cruising down neighborhood streets, hair blowing in the wind, and not a helmet in sight, epitomized the era's carefree spirit. This lack of helmet use wasn't due to ignorance, but rather a different societal perception of risk. Helmets were seen as something for race car drivers or astronauts, not for the everyday person enjoying a leisurely bike ride. The general public, including parents and authorities, were far less aware of the potential risks of head injuries from bicycle accidents. There was an implicit trust in one's ability to handle these risks without the need for protective gear. It wasn't until the late 70s and early 80s that the mindset began to shift. This change was propelled by growing awareness of safety and an increasing number of studies highlighting the risks associated with cycling without a helmet. The transition was gradual. As more data emerged on the severity and frequency of head injuries from bike accidents, the push for helmets gained momentum. Campaigns for bicycle safety began to emerge, targeting both parents and children, emphasizing the importance of wearing a helmet as an easy yet crucial measure to prevent serious injuries. While the wind in your hair feeling might have lost its charm, the increased safety that comes with wearing a helmet is a trade-off that most modern cyclists are willing to make. In the 60s, it wasn't uncommon to find exotic pets like turtles, monkeys, or even big cats in American households. The exotic pet trade was a booming business, with minimal regulation or consideration for the welfare of the animals or the ecological implications of such trade. Wild animals were often seen as unique, intriguing additions to the family, without much thought given to their natural habitats or conservation status. Perhaps the most striking example of the lax attitude towards exotic pets in the 60s is the private ownership of big cats, such as lions and tigers. It's almost surreal to imagine now, but back then, it wasn't too rare to see these majestic creatures in suburban backyards, or even as part of family photos. The allure of owning something so powerful and exotic outweighed any concerns about safety or the ethical implications of such ownership. One notable instance is the story of Neil the lion. In the late 1960s, actress Tippi Hedren, her husband Noel Marshall, and their daughter Melanie Griffith shared their home with Neil, a fully grown lion. Photos from this period show Neil lounging in their living room, playing in the yard, and even sleeping in their beds. This unconventional family arrangement was part of their life for several years, without significant legal hurdles or public outcry. This scenario from the 60s starkly contrasts with today's standards, where private ownership of big cats is heavily regulated or outright banned in many countries. You see, today, the story is quite different. Increased awareness of wildlife conservation and the risks associated with exotic pets, both to humans and the animals themselves, has led to strict regulations in this area. Laws like the Endangered Species Act and international agreements have significantly curtailed the trade in exotic animals. Owning a monkey or a tiger as a pet is no longer a sign of eccentricity, but a legal liability and a conservation concern. Who can forget the playgrounds of the 1960s? In those days, playgrounds were almost like mini adventure parks, free from the watchful eyes of overprotective adults. The metal slides, towering and steep, were a particular favorite. On hot days, they turned scorchingly hot, yet that hardly deterred the lines of eager children waiting for their turn. It was a rite of passage, a test of courage and endurance. The swings were no less thrilling. Unlike today's carefully calibrated models, these swings allowed for a wild, soaring ride, often leading to contests among children to see who could swing the highest. And then there was the merry-go-round, a dizzying device that challenged the bravest of souls, spinning faster as more children pushed, often leading to exhilarating but risky rides. The concept of child safety in play areas was in its infancy, with little consideration given to the potential dangers of hard surfaces, sharp edges, and high falls. Modern playgrounds are a stark contrast, designed with safety as a paramount concern. Rubberized surfaces, lower heights, and rounded, softer structures are the norms now. While some may argue that today's playgrounds don't offer the same level of adventure, the reduction in playground-related injuries does speak for itself. Back in the 1960s, physical punishment was a widely accepted method of discipline in both homes and schools. The adage, "spare the rod, spoil the child," was taken quite literally, with corporal punishment seen as an effective way to instill discipline and respect in children. In homes, spanking was a common response to a wide range of misbehaviors. It was not just a method of discipline, it was also a widely accepted parenting tool, believed to build character and instill values in children. The same philosophy extended to schools, where teachers often had the implicit, if not explicit, permission to use corporal punishment. Paddles hung in classrooms not just as tools of discipline, but as symbols of authority and control. Fast forward to the present, and there's a sea change in how society views this practice. Many countries have outlawed corporal punishment in schools, and an increasing number are banning it in homes as well. In the 1960s, the dangers of drinking and driving were not as widely recognized or legislated as they are today. It wasn't uncommon for people to drive home after a night of heavy drinking with little fear of legal repercussions. The societal attitude was one of casual indifference to the risks involved. I remember when, after a night of revelry and more than a few drinks, my uncle would often drive himself home. The roads were quiet and the night was clear, conditions that in his mind justified the decision. This was a time when seatbelts were rarely worn, speed limits were often ignored, and the concept of a designated driver was virtually unheard of. Driving under the influence was not at all given the gravity it is today. Today, this behavior is not only socially frowned upon, but also heavily penalized by law. Strict drink driving laws and widespread public awareness campaigns have made it clear that drinking and driving is unacceptable and dangerous. The industrial boom of the 60s brought with it a lack of environmental regulation that is unimaginable today. Factories belched out smoke and chemicals with little concern for air or water quality. The concept of environmental protection was in its nascent stages, and the impact of industrial pollution on the planet was not fully understood or acknowledged. The concept of recycling was virtually non-existent in the public consciousness. The idea that everyday items like paper, glass, and plastic could be collected, processed, and reused was not a common practice, nor was it encouraged by governments or industries. The period was marked by a use-and-throw culture, reflective of the era's broader attitudes towards consumption and waste. In stark contrast, the modern era is characterized by stringent environmental laws and a growing public consciousness about sustainability and ecological responsibility. The shift towards green technology and renewable energy sources marks a significant departure from the unchecked industrial practices of the 60s. As we look back at these once common practices, it's fascinating to see how societal norms and regulations evolve. The 1960s, with its distinctive blend of freedom and rebellion, also laid the groundwork for many of the safety and health standards we take for granted today. Which of these things that are now banned do you remember? Make sure to subscribe to the channel and let me know. Thanks for watching.